Every day's the same.
We have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
We have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
Everything is exactly the way it was before. Kill
I'm
them.
sorry. Every day's the same. I'm sorry.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, the podcast trapped in its own time loop right along with the movies we discuss. This is the first of two special hiatus episodes discussing the first time through Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban that starts at 83 minutes and 47 seconds with the trio exiting Hogwarts on their way to Hagrid's hut and ends at 100 minutes and 41 seconds with Hermione winding the time turner. And just a quick side note, these times that I'm reading out are taken off of the extended edition, which is currently streaming on Peacock. But I don't think that any of the additional scenes actually take place in this section of the movie. And there's not very many additional scenes that I noticed either. But joining me today is my guest, Nick Jobe, which you may have heard just recently at the end of Time Crimes, and the host of, I forgot your show, Infoblast. Welcome back.
It's good to be back and talking about something I love talking about. Not that I didn't love talking about Time Crimes, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I love talking about Harry Potter too. I mean, I've seen all the movie. Well, I haven't seen all the movies a ton of times. I've seen like the first 5 movies a ton of times, and then I've seen the last 3 like once, maybe twice.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Fantastic Beasts, I think I saw the first one twice, and then the second 2 just once.
Yeah, I guess now would be a kind of good time to give my background with Harry Potter. I love Harry Potter. Harry Potter basically turned my reading life kind of around. I wasn't a huge reader until Harry Potter. I was one of those kids. And I probably started reading the books a smidge before the first movie came out, and so I saw every movie in theater. I believe even opening weekend, every one, and that includes I saw one in Hawaii because I was on vacation with my family, and I had to make a stop and see. That would have been Deathly Hallows Part 2, I think. In the theater. I couldn't miss it. Anyway, so I have a Harry Potter partial tattoo. I'm a big Harry Potter fan. The books and movies are both great in their own ways. I have particular beef with Prisoner of Azkaban, and I know I'm on a minority in this because a lot of people.
Well, I think that I wouldn't necessarily call it a minority because I mean there are 8 movies. And I do think that Prisoner of Azkaban is like one of the most, like, is probably number 1 out of people that would call it their favorites. But then all the rest are pretty evenly distributed. Like, it's at 20% have that one as their favorites. And then the other ones are like, 16 and 17%. So it's like very close, but Azkaban just edges them out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into my issues with the movie, and I'm sure yours as well as we go through this. But I'm excited to talk Prisoner of Azkaban again.
Yeah, and as far as my history with Harry Potter, I started with the movies. I can't remember if I saw Sorcerer's Stone in theaters, but I have seen most of them in theaters, including all 3 of the Fantastic Beasts movies. And I came into the books afterwards, and I came into the audiobook first. And then I think I've only read the physical books, like actually read them and not listened to them, like maybe the first 4 books. And I don't think I've physically read like the last 3 because I know we have the first 4 books physically, and I'm pretty sure I've taken the time to read them at some point because the 4th one less so, but the first 3 books are not, they're fairly quick reads.
Yeah.
But I love the series too, and I think Prisoner of Azkaban, I would probably call this one my favorite. although I do definitely agree that there are some major issues with it. I think for me, the basically the time loop that we're talking about here at the end makes up for the failings kind of throughout the movie, because it does have a weird mix of tones where it's it's the darkest of the first three movies, but it also has these cartoonishly comedic
Mhm.
elements sprinkled throughout.
Yeah, it's definitely it takes the series in another direction. So like historically at the time, the first two movies were Chris Columbus, and they were very Chris Columbus, very clean and kid friendly, and they they were fine. Most people didn't really care for Chamber of Secrets. I know that one gets a lot of flack, but
Yeah, Sorcerer's Stone for a long time was my go-to
yeah.
movie to fall asleep to, just because it's so magical, and it
Yeah.
has the tone and the
Mhm.
music, and it's just very comforting. It's an extremely comforting
Yeah, and
movie.
in comes Alfonso Cuarón, with his own visual flair, and gives us a visual feast of a Harry Potter movie for the first time. And this is where the series really started changing direction in tone and style. Um, and focus too, because Quran went on to basically inspire the fact that the movie should be solely Harry focused and everything else needs to be cut out of the films. And
Yeah, which I don't think that's necessarily a bad decision, because I do think that a movie like this, it's good to have, an audience focus, to have the film be more focused in order to compress the time so it doesn't end up being like a 4 hour movie.
I
I mean, they're all over 2 hours, and this is the shortest movie at like 2 hours and 19
I
minutes.
agree to a degree in that I think they went towards that too strictly at times. This movie being one
Mhm.
of them, where it needed something that wasn't necessarily Harry centric itself, but it was still something vital to the overall story of Harry Potter. And things like that were cut out in favor of other things that didn't need to be there. And those instances really bugged me. Uh,
Yeah, I think it does have a lot of things added that weren't in the books. Although I will say that I think one of them has become so enmeshed with the Harry Potter universe
the talking
that,
head.
no, I mean, not specifically, but I'm talking about
Oh
quotes.
yeah.
The Dumbledore
Hmm.
quotes. Happiness can be found even in the worst of times, if one
Just
only
turn on the
remembers
light.
to turn on the
Yeah.
light, which that was not in the books, but it's such a good quote.
Yeah.
And it's become so enmeshed with the Harry Potter fandom that I think a lot of people
Mhm.
forget that it was a movie only
Yeah,
quote.
no, there's a lot of the all the movies really do have a line here or there that wasn't in the book, or maybe they reworded it a little bit from the book. Um, and they do that really well. Like Order of the Phoenix had um the when they go out in the forest and he's like, tell him I mean them no harm, and Harry says, sorry, Professor, I must not tell lies, bringing that back. And I was like, that's not in the book. And that is an amazing moment that should have been in the book. Um,
Yeah.
or the Lily story from Slughorn in Half Blood Prince. Like, none of that was in the book. And it's one of the most beautiful pieces of that movie. And so, like, all of these do that. And that's a great example. The Dumbledore one, I think Dumbledore gets a couple quotes from the movies that aren't in the books. Um,
Yeah, I just remember that one the
yeah,
most because, we have that engraved on a sign as a decoration in our
nice.
house.
So yeah, no, Quran definitely brought some very positive things towards the series. But as we go through the movie, I'll kind of bring up my qualms with some of the direction he chose and put the series toward, for very specific reasons.
Yeah, one thing that I will mention that I think was a good choice was that he made like the dress code overall less
Yeah.
strict and
Hmm.
more casual. Like he still gave all the kids their robes, but he didn't tell them exactly how to wear them.
Right.
So like in the first two movies, it really felt like a private
Hmm.
school where everybody had the same uniform and they wore them all the same way. And in this one, you do still get the uniform, but it's a lot more loose. People have, kids have their shirts untucked in different, in various ways. And there's also a lot more like
Hmm.
t-shirts and more casual clothing sprinkled
What
throughout.
I love about the David Yates era, the later like five through eight, is that he incorporates all the best things from all the former movies and kind of makes an amalgamation of everything. And this particular thing is one of the best things that he takes from Alfonso Cuarón, which is just the visual aspect and the aesthetic of like what you said, like the clothes, the uniforms, all of that, and just rolls with that uh more modern look than kind of the stuffy child, uniform look.
Yeah. Well, I think we should go ahead and jump into the actual loop part. Like I said, this starts out with the trio um, coming in on Draco and his
Hmm.
gang. And I think one of the first things that's worth pointing out is the last half of the movie. It's his gang. It consists of Crab and Pike,
Hmm.
and not Crab and Goyle. And that's because the
Hmm.
actor that played Goyle actually injured his arm early in the movie, and he had to drop out of most of the filming. And so they replaced him with this original character that they named Pike. I'm not sure if it was like in the script, but in the credits, I believe he's credited as Pike, even though I don't think we ever hear his name on screen.
Yeah, the Crab and Goyle actors have a history of some really bad luck and going back and forth through things. I believe the Crab actor kept getting in a lot of legal issues later on.
Yeah, and I think after the next movie, he got charged with marijuana possession,
Yeah.
and that's why he's not in the sixth and the last two Deathly Hollows
Right.
movies.
And I don't think anything happened with Goyle. I think actually now he's like an MMA fighter or something. But uh,
Yeah, he is an MMA fighter. I read that, and he, I think he actually got Crab's death in
mhm.
the final movie.
No, I think no, it was the other guy. It was Blaze that got Crab's death. He fell into the
Hmm.
fire because he took his spot, I believe.
Okay, I just
Yeah.
quickly glanced something on the internet, so either I read it wrong or it was
Yeah.
wrong. But I enjoy the scene in
Hmm.
general. I think this is really one of the most iconic moments for
Yeah.
Hermione, and I do love like at the beginning. As they're coming in, we do hear like Draco mumbling, like talking quietly. I don't know how much you can like hear it through the audio, but the subtitles do pick it up that Draco is saying that his father said that he could keep Buckbeak's head, and he figured that he would donate it to the Gryffindor common room.
Jeez. Um, yeah, I this is one where there's a slight change from the book, but I think it works better here in the movie. And that is
Mhm.
the actual hit from Hermione. In the book, it's described, I believe, just as a slap, but in the movie, she straight up punches him in the face. So I like that much better.
Yeah, that I think that's a really this is really a character defining
Mhm.
moment for Hermione at this point in the films. And it's also, I think it's important for Draco's character, which we've seen him at various points, especially in this movie. But, whenever he's faced with an actual threat, he just becomes, a whimpering
Mhm.
mess if he doesn't have his father or his goons right there backing him
Right.
up.
Which I think is mildly accurate, but also a little changed from his character in the books. I don't think he was as, you know, sniffling and whiny in the books as he is in the movie. I know he was to a degree, but not like as put up for comedy, you know?
Mhm. And there is like, I think one of the most hard to catch Easter eggs in this scene
Mhm.
too. And still, I was looking for it and I didn't see it as I was watching it, but there is like a couple frames where you can just barely make out Hermione's hand on the
Mm.
archway, like really just kind of her fingers poking out. But you can really only see it if you're like watching it on a big screen or if you have like a big 4K
Nice.
TV,
I'll have to look at that.
because it's extremely small and it's extremely quick. It's like in a wide shot whenever Hermione is running up to
Mm.
Draco.
Like pulling out her wand. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
But then, they Draco and his gang runs off and they make it to Hagrid's hut, which I don't understand why they decided to just give him this pumpkin patch.
Because Alfonso Cuarón said so.
Especially because it gives off very fall vibes, but
Mhm.
I feel like based on where this is in the movie and with the school year, I would think that they would be in spring at this point.
Yeah, they would be.
But then they go into Hagrid's hut and they have this moment, and this does a few things. It sets up the fact that for the audience that Hagrid can't just set Buckbeak free,
Right.
because the ministry would assume who it was that did it. And then we also get the return of Scabbers, who's been in hiding because I guess he knows at this point that since that Sirius is looking for him.
Yeah. You also get a handful of where time loop things start interacting with each other.
Yeah.
Um so you get like I think
The first thing
Harry.
is the vase breaking with the
Oh yeah,
rock.
the base breaking, and then like Harry gets hit in the back of the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He picks up the rock and it's like it looks like a rock with like a small fossil on it.
Yeah, it looks like almost like a shell. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that happens, and then like Dumbledore and Cornelius Fudge
And the
show up,
executioner.
and the executioner show up at the door, and Dumbledore's being pretty chatty. And then the kids sneak out the back door.
Yeah, which I think it's funny that Hagrid says, what if someone sees you at this time of night? And I was just thinking, what time of night is it? If it's spring, it's got to be like 7:30, 8 o'clock, based on how light it still is.
Right. Yeah, I never thought about that with it being spring, but there's like all those pumpkins.
Mm-hmm.
Because pumpkins are like a fall vegetable or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, that doesn't make sense. And another thing to add to my Alfonso Cuarón directing thing.
Yeah,
Um
there is a moment that happens later that I'll get to.
mhm.
Um, and then they sneak out the back as they Dumbledore and Fudge and the Executioner come inside the hut, and as they're kind of looking through the window, they hear a snap, and Hermione turns around and says, "I thought I just saw." And so,
Mhm.
do you think that she realizes at that point that she saw future Hermione? Because, at this point, she's been using the time turner all year. So
Uh-huh.
she's aware of the implications of time travel.
Um, I don't know if she knows. I'd say she either has a suspicion or doesn't know, which if it's the latter, that's a little poor direction again, or like performance or acting or whatever, because she looks more confused or like, I don't know, startled or confused or whatever, than having a look of recognition. Um,
Uh,
so I
the,
don't know.
the way that I read it is I feel like she did recognize herself, but at this point, she doesn't understand why she would be there.
Yeah.
And she knows not to question it or to try to interact with her or to tell the others
Mhm.
what's happened, because she's been told not to talk about time travel because people will think you're crazy.
Right.
So I think that she just internalized it, and she's like, oh, that was me. I wonder how I get there, but there's no time to think about that now. I just got to focus on the now, and then it'll happen when it happens.
That's definitely a good read on it. I've never thought about it from that, kind of perspective before, but that actually seems like it could be accurate, could be a good actual read on the scene. Um
And it
so
feels
yeah,
very Hermione,
it
especially the way
does.
she's
Yeah.
acted this entire movie, with taking the double classes and her reactions to Ron being surprised that she
Hmm.
shows up out of nowhere in class.
Yeah. Yeah. When did you get here? So yeah, and then they kind of run
They run
away.
back up to the landing where they had the confrontation with Draco, and they watched what they think is the Buckbeak execution from a distance,
Hmm.
which I do feel like this scene especially is a bit of a cop out, especially how long they focus on the executioner
Hmm.
raising the axe to slice what we eventually know is just a pumpkin in frustration, because
Yeah.
this does not feel like slicing a pumpkin out of frustration.
Yeah. No, I definitely get that. Um, and a lot of the stuff that we're commenting on, again, is not, I don't think, stuff from the book. I want to say a lot of the time travel and focus on time and all of that was a Quran addition. Um, he like there was the time travel, of course, in the book with the time turner and all that, but it wasn't as hefty of a sequence as and focus as the movie makes it out to be. So I think a lot of the things we've been talking about, like where they're giving little hints that the trio is doing things in the background in the next loop, um, were all big additions to the movie. And that those are the kind of things that we're just kind of questioning in general right now. So I think that's interesting. Um, and I don't know. I think that it was just very movie like for them to do that.
Mm.
There wasn't any plot reason for that to happen except to have this movie moment to focus on yet another time travel style repeat sequence. Um, and when it becomes a thing where it's like it's doing this for the sake of doing this, but not for the sake of the story, especially based on things that are left out of this movie that didn't need to be, it kind of makes me frustrated. Um, so yeah, I 100% get where you're coming from on this one with the cutting of the pumpkin. But we also get another reason for that moment is the one Hermione turns to when the axe comes down.
Yeah, I definitely have that. That's my next note. I
Oh, go ahead.
love
Yeah.
this reaction shot
Hmm.
with the three of them, because I think it really encapsulates their all three of their personalities in such a great way. Because Hermione's first reaction is to embrace Ron.
Hmm.
What meanwhile Ron is just kind of standing there dumbfounded. He's just not doing anything. And Harry sees the situation, and then he puts his hand on Hermione's shoulder to help comfort her.
Yeah. Uh, I like that too. And again, it's not all like it's not all things that I dislike. Even though he put that focus on Harry, he does actually build the Ron and Hermione relationship more for the first time in the franchise. Earlier in the movie, there's the accidental hand holding, and then that leads ultimately to this moment where she turns and embraces Ron
Mhm.
over Harry.
And
And
they were practically having a date in front of the Shrieking Shack whenever Harry comes
practically,
up with the
yeah,
invisible cloak.
yeah, they were just kind of hanging out on their own, playing around. Um, yeah, no. I do like that because I was a Ron and Hermione fan from the beginning in the books, and to me it makes more sense in the books. I don't care what anyone, including J.K. Rowling, has to say about it, because I know she freaking backtracked on it too. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, I think that Ron is a better match for Hermione than Harry. I think it would make sense for like if everything else, if this was like just a normal school season without Voldemort in the way, if the three of them were just having regular classes and just typical high school and middle school type drama, I think that Hermione would have probably dated Harry for a year,
Mhm.
but then ended up with Ron.
I think too, a lot of people who prefer Harry and Hermione couple only mostly know the movie because, in the end, spoilers, Harry gets with Ginny Weasley. And if you just watch the movies, you're like, why?
Yeah,
Because
it comes out of nowhere in the
yeah,
movies.
and it comes out of nowhere, and Ginny is horribly portrayed in the films. Her No offense to Bonnie Wright, the
I mean, she's not
actress.
even in this movie. I
No,
mean, she is, but she
yeah,
isn't.
they're not. It's not a great portrayal, and they really change her character. You get a smidge of her personality in Order of the Phoenix, but that's about it. And especially when we get to like Half Blood Prince, and we get all the romance, it's nauseating almost, the performance that poor Ginny gets with her alterations from the book. But it makes more sense that Harry ends up with book Ginny than it does in the movie. So if you're not familiar with any of that, Harry and Hermione makes total sense.
Mm.
Um,
Because they
and
spend so much time together, and
right,
it's also the whole, you tend to be, it's like the trope of being attracted to somebody that you've been in a crisis with.
yeah. And also, um,
And they've had like basically 7 years of a constant crisis.
yeah, pretty much. Um, yeah, I don't. I think they could be. Yeah, they wouldn't do well together anyway. Harry's too. Harry. I don't know. It's a weird conversation. I know there's a lot of controversy behind it, and I think book Ron 2 is better than movie Ron. Again, no offense to Rupert Grint, who did a great comedic performance. Um, and some good, other parts, especially in the latter movies. But uh,
I've seen a lot of memes that remind you that Book Ron is actually very smart, and he
yeah,
figures out a lot of things
mhm.
that the other two don't.
He's
And a
smart.
lot of that is skipped over in the movies.
He's a lot braver in the books than he is in the films, where he's played as more of a chicken in the movies, and he also a lot of his
Yeah,
best
especially,
lines.
speaking of Ron being a chicken, I think that's a good transition to this next moment where, um, you know, going back to the the action, this is where Scabbers bites Ron to run
Oh
away yet
yeah.
again, and then he's grabbed by Ron, and then this is where Sirius Black, as in his dog form, comes to drag Ron through the tunnel underneath the
Hmm.
Whomping Willow to the Shrieking Shack. And I think this whole section, I love it and I hate it at the same time,
Hmm.
because this again gets into that cartoonish action that we were talking about, even though it has my like one of my favorite moments. And I will admit right away that it is not a good moment, but I just love it. And that's where Hermione's being swung around, and then it has the moment where it's focused on Harry, and then the branch comes in, and then it like pauses enough for Hermione to grab Harry by the shirt, and then they get whisked off, and then she tosses him into the tunnel. Like
Hmm.
just the way that moment looks it's extremely cartoonish, but at the same time, I love it. And I can't defend it. Like, I know it's not a good moment for, like, this does not fit within the Harry Potter universe, but I still love it.
Yeah. I definitely get where you're coming from in this segment. The Whomping Willow has always been more because I don't know. I think a violent tree, is going to be inherently comedic, especially in a kids movie.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not like you can turn it into the Evil Dead trees
right. Um,
or even like the Wizard of Oz trees.
mhm. God, no, not that terrifying. But anyway, yeah, the Shrieking Shack bit here, that is another one of my big pet peeves of this movie. One of them.
Yeah,
Uh
it has a lot of great moments, but it also has a lot of cringy moments because it's like this entire this entire problem could have been solved if everybody just taught it, just communicated clearly.
yeah, especially after the Marauders map became involved.
Mhm.
That means and that does become an inherent plot device when Lupin is talking about seeing Peter Pettigrew's name on the map. The the whole Marauders thing for certain, that's never explained.
Yeah, and again, there's the whole, like, kind of, at least I think it's a bit of a plot hole where Snape, yeah, you would think that Snape would probably recognize the names
Uh-huh.
on the Marauders map because from my understanding, those were those weren't like secret nicknames that they had with each other. I mean, I could be wrong. They could be like secret names that they only had with each other.
When you look at, say, like Order of the Phoenix, he uses those names with Snape to give him like a coded message where he's like, he
Yeah,
says Padfoot is in the place where it's hidden, or whatever, and Snape is meant to know what that means. Um, which is a plot hole in the movies because Harry never learns who the Marauders are, so he shouldn't know those names. Um, and that's my biggest pet peeve with the third movie is it never does a 3-minute top explanation of who the Marauders are, when it's like the entire point that the book was even written. So that's where I come in with my issues is this sequence and or the office sequence at the very end, which we're not going to be talking about that today. And yeah, I don't know. I get what you're saying, and it does kind of turn cartoonish, and they keep turning what's the spell? Um
Expelliarmus.
Expelliarmus into like an attack spell when it's just a disarming
Yeah, I
spell.
have some notes on that, and I'm not going to get it. I won't get into it just yet,
Yeah.
but I will get into it here pretty quickly. Yeah, so we're in the Shrieking Shack, and everybody shows up, and Remus comes in, Lupin, and Wolf, and um, he says the line, finally, the flesh reflects the madness within.
Hmm.
Now, do you know what he's supposed to mean by that? Because in the next movie, seems perfectly sane, but in this moment, is this just a line to throw the audience off to make them think that Lupin is on Harry's side, and then you realize that he's actually on Sirius's side?
Probably. That sounds pretty accurate. Um, I I don't know what else it could mean or why it would be said outside of that reasoning of that it just again, it's another pumpkin axe moment where it's just for the movie for the misdirection.
Yeah, and that's I will say that in general, like especially on rewatches, the red herrings are my least favorite elements about the Harry Potter movies, and they're in like so many of them. I think the only one where I actually think it's done well is Goblet of Fire.
I was gonna say Goblet of Fire has a bajillion red herrings, but it's because it's supposed to be like a mystery thriller, so its genre is built for red herrings, which is probably why it works so well.
Yeah, but like, I so much hates the Snape red herring in the first movie.
Mhm.
I am not fond of the Hagrid red herring in the second movie.
Mm.
And then this one with Sirius Black being the red herring through the whole movie.
Yeah.
And then
Um,
the fourth movie, I think that, Doctor Who impersonating Mad Eye Mooney is done well. Like that's the one
except for
good,
the tongue thing.
yeah. Well, I think that's subtle enough that even on a rewatch you notice it, but it's not overly distracting unless you're really focusing on it.
Uh,
And then I could be wrong, but I think they finally drop it in the fifth movie.
yeah, because Umbridge is pretty clearly evil.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I don't think they have any more really after that. Uh, I think,
I mean, I guess you could kind of say it's been too long since I've watched it, but the reveal, maybe it's not so much a red herring, but the reveal that the Half Blood Prince is Snape.
is Snape. Yeah, which makes way more sense in the books than it does in the movie. Because again, they cut out like all of that story for the movie for some reason. Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from. It doesn't bother me, I think, as much as it bothers you. The Snape one makes sense to me for the first movie because they have to set up Snape strongly as a primary antagonist, which even though he's not the essential bad guy, it still does well setting him up as a central antagonist in Harry's life. Which is what
Yeah,
it's meant
and I
to
do have
do.
to say that Snape does get a good moment in this movie in
Mhm.
just a little bit that I'll get to when we get to.
I know what you're talking about, I think too. Um, but yeah, and then I get the Hagrid thing. I think that's something else that worked better in the book than the movie, but I do understand a frustration with that one. I think Hagrid in the first two movies in general is done kind of weirdly. But yeah, and then the kind of fake out with Lupin and Sirius being bad or not, or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
I think one of my favorite Harry Potter memes that I've seen recently is like whenever they um rewrite the ending of the last book, I named him after the bravest person I know, um Rubius Hagrid uh Potter.
I don't know. That could have been better than Albus
Severus.
Severus.
Yeah, but jumping back to the scene, this I think this is the next most iconic moment with the I did my waiting 12 years of it
Yeah,
in
in
Azkaban.
Azkaban. There's a little bit of overacting in this movie in particular. Um, Daniel Radcliffe has he was their friend and he betrayed them. Like moment in the snow, like that's
Yeah.
not great either. It's definitely this whole scene is it almost come feels like it's made by Moulin Rouge guy.
Oh, Baz Luhrmann.
Yeah, Baz Luhrmann. Like the way like the shack moves around all the time and everything's kind of trippy and then everyone's moving quickly and turning on each other. Um but yeah, no, it's
It's like the end of an Agatha Christie parody.
right. It kind of is, yeah. Everyone starts turning bad, but then they're not really bad. And there's like, yeah, no, I get it.
And then this is where we get the Expelliarmus flinging.
Yes.
And to reference another meme that I love, it's a Bruce Lee quote
Mhm.
that's I don't fear the man who's practiced 10,000 kicks once. I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times.
Mhm.
And Harry Potter is the man who's practiced Expelliarmus 10,000 times.
Accurate. Yeah, the Expelliarmus thing gets a little, even in the book, it gets a little ridiculous. Ultimately, again, spoilers. It's ultimately the spell that like kills Voldemort at the end of the book. More, not exactly, but more or less.
Yeah, but
And
I feel like the way that they portray Harry Potter in the movies, especially,
uh,
is he is a very powerful spellcaster.
yeah,
And he only uses a small handful of spells, but he does use them extremely effectively, and he
hmm
puts a lot of power behind them.
yeah,
And with that definition, like with that explanation, I feel like that makes sense that he's like, whenever Sirius and Lupin do Expelliarmus, they just fling the wand out of his hand
hmm
because they are doing precision spell casting. But Harry Potter is doing a power spell casting. And so that's why whenever he casts Expelliarmus on Snape, he flings Snape across the room.
yeah. And this also kind of, this discussion ties into something we were talking about earlier with the relationships. And this is another reason that Harry and Ginny are a good match, because Ginny is also a powerhouse spellcaster.
Mhm.
Which again, that's the thing that was moderately explored in Order of the Phoenix in the
Yeah, with her
DA spell.
powerful reducto charm.
Yeah, but yeah, Harry is a powerful spellcaster, so that makes sense that this would like blast them back. Yeah, it gets the wand out of their hand, but it also like knocks them unconscious.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's one of the spells that they change. They kind of liberally change what spells do in the movies from the books. Um, and this is one they're very infrequent with. This and Polyjuice Potion, they're all whatever the plot needs it for.
I can't remember which one it was called. It was one that was used in the first movie. That's in the book. It's described as like a tickling charm, but in the movie, it just knocks them backwards like every other one.
Oh yeah, that was yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think that's in the second one. That's in the dueling club scene between
Yeah.
Harry and Draco. And then like in same thing, Finite Incantatem, Hermione does that on the bludger as it's coming down to attack Harry in Chamber of Secrets, and it like explodes the bludger, but all it should actually do is remove the spell that had been placed upon it.
Mhm.
So they do things like that where they really change up. The biggest instance of this is the Priori Incantatem, and the wand linking that started in Goblet of Fire.
Yeah.
That
Which I can understand why they do
yeah,
that because they make it a lot more visual for the
visual.
visual medium.
That I really, we're not talking about Goblet of Fire, so I won't go on that rant, but I do have one of those for that particular moment. But I'll save that for another show.
All right, and I think this is a good spot here. And going back to the scene, like, what are your thoughts on Sirius's tattoos? Because we mainly just see the big one on his chest, which I did look that one up at least, and it's basically an alchemical symbol for amalgamation, and I read that that's somehow linked to the gray wolf. Although I did notice that, it's a big like a U with a line going straight down the bottom, and
Oh yeah.
then his tattoo has two like cross, like T crosses
hmm
going across it. Although the actual alchemical symbol has three lines going across it.
Yeah, I don't know. They're very interesting. They're very like runic.
Yeah, and all the rest of them are a combination of alchemical symbols and Nordic runes.
Yeah. And then he has some circling around his nipple. Um,
So, like, where do you like when and where do you think he got these tattoos?
uh, I don't know if he would have gotten them in Azkaban. They
Yeah,
have
because I think visually they do seem like they're
like
supposed to
prison
represent like
tattoos.
prison tattoos, but the way that Azkaban is described, it doesn't feel like Azkaban feels like a very solitary confinement type of prison.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're just wallowing in misery because of the Dementors.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know, unless he got them prior to going to Azkaban. He was a rebel in his family, so maybe he just got them on the interim between graduating Hogwarts and getting blamed for murder.
Because I do think that at least that amalgamation tattoo could be because of him being able to turn into a dog.
Yeah.
But all the rest of them, those are harder to figure out just because it just seems like a
Mhm.
visual thing that they decided. Well, um, does he hate, like, do they mention tattoos in the books?
Just the dark mark tattoos.
Hmm.
That I think those are the main tattoos that are brought up, but that starts in Goblet of Fire.
Mhm.
And I don't think Sirius has one of those, so
Right. We get the reveal of Wormtail as being
mhm.
Ron's hiding out as Ron's rat, which
So many issues with this.
no.
I mean, that's not just a movie thing. That's a book thing too, but yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's someone hiding out as a rat for 12 years.
You're trying to tell me Fred and George never noticed on the map.
Well, actually, that one I actually came up with a head canon for that because they talk about them finding the Marauders map in their first year. So this would have been 2 years before Ron showed up. So they had 2 years with the Marauders map by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the Marauders map only works in Hogwarts. Like it's not like they bring the Marauders map home and then they see Ron in the Ron's room. Like it's just the map for Hogwarts.
Yeah.
And then whenever Ron comes in, I don't think that they're like they've pretty much put the map away. I feel like they only reference like they've had 2 years of playing with the Marauders map. They've studied it and they're done with it at that point. They only use it whenever they need to use it, and they're only looking at the paths that they need to look at. So
no, that makes sense.
I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that no, they never looked in on Ron and saw Peter Pettigrew.
Yeah, and I guess this school year in particular, Scabbers was like missing for a chunk of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, that sounds fair.
Because I think that they would have also considered to look at it to keep an eye out for Sirius Black, which that's something that they don't really talk about until Lupin says that Sirius could use it to find Harry.
Yeah.
But they don't talk about using it to keep an eye out for Sirius.
Mm-hmm.
They leave at this point and Harry decides to spare Wormtail's life temporarily, basically just
getting him to the Dementors.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily a mercy. It's just, I mean, they explain it shortly afterwards that, he's just sparing him for the Dementors to
take his soul.
Yeah. And also that way that, his existence would free Sirius Black. It would clear him of all charges.
Mm-hmm.
And I do like that whenever they exit the tunnel, we do get another brief Ron and Hermione moment. And again, it's hard to hear what Ron's saying, but there are subtitles where Hermione's saying that it's not that bad, and Madame Pomfrey will fix it in a heartbeat. But Ron says that they'll definitely have to chop it.
Oh yeah, you have to cut it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get another instance of making Ron a little goofy, but I think it works here. It's cute.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then they get out, and I know Harry is talking to Sirius about like possibly staying with him or whatever.
Yeah, this is the movie moment where things look like it's over before it's about to get even worse than it has been.
Yeah.
Where everything just goes to hell. But another note that I did want to point out is you can really tell Wormtail's character at this moment as he's begging for his life, and he's like telling Ron that he's always been a good rat, and he calls Hermione a clever girl, but he never calls either of them by name, even though he must have had his human intelligence, at least most of it, if not all of it, in his 12 years as Ron's rat.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that at this point he doesn't care to learn their names or to call them by their names just shows how little he thinks of them.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And he's really just in it to, as self-preservation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the self-preservation really kind of pinpoints exactly the kind of character Peter Pettigrew is, because that's the only reason he did what he did with Voldemort was for his own self-preservation. And the reason he goes back to get Voldemort back is just for his own self-preservation. It's all his cowardice and, all that.
Yeah, because he probably would have been perfectly happy just staying with Ron as a rat for a few
Mm-hmm.
more years until Voldemort was eventually defeated. But the fact that they know that he was a traitor to James and Lily
Uh-huh.
means that that's no longer a safe space, and so he goes to what he thinks is his next safe space, which is back with Voldemort.
Yeah.
I am curious what you think of, or what you know about just the concept of familiars within the Harry Potter universe, because I know that there is a lot of animals and they're referred to as familiars, but especially in the movies, and I think maybe a little bit less so, but I can't really think of any specific instances where any of the animals really act more like what you would think of as a familiar in the books. They just seem like pets.
The main instance, I think, of like a traditional familiar would be Fawkes the Phoenix, with Dumbledore. Um, I think that's probably the biggest instance of one, which doesn't really play here. And you have Sirius and the dog, his dog form, the big black dog, which hasn't quite been a familiar, more as like the Omen that they talk about earlier in the
Yeah, the
movie,
Grim.
with the Grim, and you have that kind of going on, which similar in concept, but still not quite the same thing. Um, Otherwise, yeah, it's just kind of like owls or birds of some kind.
Yeah, because
Um,
as far as I can tell, it's basically just pets with
Pets, yeah.
greater intelligence and
Mhm.
a slightly greater bond than a typical pet master relationship.
Right. It more like a pet that's also like a friend.
Mhm. But there's not any of that communication, and there's not any like I think in some witches tales they can use the familiar for like their eyes and ears, and they
Mhm.
can have this communication where they can use like their familiars to scout for them.
Right, yeah. And again, I think Fox is the strongest example of that, especially when, again, spoilers, Dumbledore dies eventually. So Fox also kind of goes away. And
Mhm.
so that is another like example of what you're talking about, where there's that way more closer bond and connection between animal and, with witch or wizard, that I don't think it gets to really with any of the other characters as much.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, because really you just have like the relationship between Harry and
Hedwig.
Hedwig. And Hedwig definitely seems very intelligent, but
Hmm.
we don't really get a whole lot other than that.
Yeah, just it's a bird
Yeah.
that Harry has.
Mm. And then we back to the scene, we have Lupin dealing with his lycanthropy, which
Hmm.
he's had this condition for I think over 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
You'd think that he would be better at dealing with it by now.
Yeah, he got it. Didn't he get it as a child
Yeah, like
from
uh,
Gray no, what's his name?
Well, I mean, he definitely had it whenever he was in
Greyback.
school.
Yeah. He got it from Fenrir Greyback
Yeah,
as a child. Yeah, and he had it in school because that's then why the like
that's
James
why
and
they
them
built the Shrieking Shack, and that's why they
chicken,
planted
yeah,
the Whomping Willow.
and why the other Marauders became animagi,
Yeah.
to so they could hang out with him while he was a werewolf. Um,
And they don't really explain his potion. And I know
no.
that he's always shown as having, the scars eh, from his werewolf days,
Mhm.
which I'm guessing that the potion doesn't prevent him from changing, it just makes him less or more controllable.
Hmm. I think yeah, that's not really gone into in the books either. But I think something that they did leave out in regards to that, that again wouldn't have been very hard or take a while to even describe. But the fact that in the book it talks about how they almost kill, or like James and them almost killed Snape by doing a prank on him to go into the tunnel to go to the Shrieking Shack while Lupin was in werewolf form and he almost died. So as a kid, Lupin almost killed Snape, and now Snape is having to create this potion for Lupin in order to keep him, whatever, sane or docile. um, so it's kind of another layer for why Snape is hating everything going on right now. And, on top of that, with Harry and just being like his dad and all that, I think that's all really good stuff, and it wouldn't have taken long to add it in. Again, I think that's part of the point of this book is the backstory, and all the backstory was cut out, which just drives me crazy.
Yeah. And Wormtail here, he turns from a human back to a rat. And whenever he turned from a rat to a human, his clothes appeared with him. And yet now whenever he turns back into a rat, his clothes stay there.
Yeah, he shrinks down out of his clothes.
Mm.
I don't know. Maybe he has the ability to change and get naked at the same time, or change with his clothes.
Could be. And then this is the moment I was talking about. Snape comes back
Yeah.
through the tunnel just to get attacked by werewolf Lupin. But it is worth noting that, especially in this scene, um, the way that Alan Rickman plays it is he is always in between Lupin and the children.
Hmm. And he blocks them. He
Yeah.
like literally puts his arms out to protect them.
Yeah, and I
Which
am not a Snape apologist by any means. I think that he is a horrible character and he just does the bare minimum of redeeming himself at the end. Because I think that, one good deed does not make up for years of horrible treatment.
Mhm.
Uh, but I do think that he does good in this moment.
I think a lot of people mix up loving Snape as he has to be a good guy. And I don't think that's true. I think Snape is an amazing character. Is he a good person? No. But he is still a very fascinating and so very complex and well written character.
Mm,
Um, and one of my favorites from the series. But, I'm not going to argue that, oh, he was a saint. Um, and, he did cause mental anguish for Harry, and he was awful to a lot of the kids, and he was part of the reason that Harry's parents died, and all sorts of stuff. So no, he wasn't great. He did redeem himself, and he does show that he is in the end there as a protector, even though it's at times unwilling. um but yeah, I think he's there to protect them, and he does care for them, because there's even in the Prince's Tale in the last book and movie, shows that Dumbledore's actually more cold-hearted than Snape in some instances, where Snape was like taken aback by just how cruel Dumbledore was having to be towards Harry.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect example because Alan Rickman knew J.K. Rowling told him his whole arc because the books hadn't been complete at the time. And he was the only one who knew, and he kept that secret till the day he died.
Yeah, I think they just recently released his excerpts from his diaries that he kept,
Yeah.
and
And
it
so
has bits of that in there, and that's like I've only like read like a couple lines regarding that, but I think that's great, and I'm personally I'm curious to uh, read that, or at least read some more
mhm.
snippets of that as they get released.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to look at that up too. I didn't realize that was happening. But yeah, we all knew that it had to do with this, like how Snape ended. Um, and but it's really shown well here in Alan Rickman's kind of turn to protect the kids and always being between them, knowing that that was his choice to do this.
Yeah, and we don't really get too much with the werewolf because he runs off hearing future Hermione off in the
Which
distance.
I just want to talk real quick about the werewolf itself. Talk about a little bit of a disappointment here. Like I know they went off a certain mythology or whatever for this particular werewolf, or I don't know, but scrawny, tall, and lanky, and with the comb over hair, and like it just didn't it, for a werewolf that's supposed to be like the climax monster and you're supposed to be scared of him and all this, like it's a very wimpy looking werewolf, and they could have done a much better job of kind of making him at least a little bit more frightening.
Yeah, and especially the way that they first introduce him, because like right after he changes, he like is whimpering, and they
uh
almost think that he's they're concerned about him rather than being afraid of him from the start.
yeah.
I think I know there's still a couple big parts that we want to talk about, but I think we should try to wrap things up.
Yeah.
This is the big moment with the um herd of dementor. What do you call a herd of dementor? A group of dementors.
uh,
An
uh
insanity of dementors.
right, a cauldron.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, just a group, a giant blob of dementors, a shadow.
Yeah. And we can see the stag patronus that's
Mhm.
mostly obscuring future Harry on the other side of the lake. And at this point, I don't think he even know, like you said, he doesn't know anything about the Marauders, so he doesn't know
Yeah,
that the connection between James and the stag.
right. So it's just I saw my dad. Um,
But like right before he passes out, he does like the stag, the light does fade away, and like you don't see it on screen, but you can. I think it's not too much of a stretch that seeing him off, from a distance as he's about to pass out,
yeah,
he could be mistaken that him in the distance looks like
could be
his
his dad.
dad, what he's seen of his dad in the pictures.
And especially because the books make a big point of it too, that he looks just like his dad, except he has his mother's eyes. Like
Yeah.
that's just such a repeated quote. That he could
And we're
probably
not going to go into the fact that he has the wrong color's eyes in the movie.
right. Uh, or they also, I also haven't understood the Patronus uh workings in the movie, because sometimes it's the animal and then other times it's just a wave of light.
Yeah.
And even in this case, in this round, you see the stag, but then when he does it later, it's just a pulsing of light, and it's
Mhm.
not the stag. um
Yeah. And whenever he casts it before he sees himself, it's more like, a shield of light, which
right.
I like how that looks.
It's not just it's not very consistent.
Mhm.
They make it more consistent, I think, in the later movies, but in this one, it was just kind of doing what needed to be done for the particular moment.
Yeah. And then he wakes up in the hospital wing, and we find out that wizard justice works pretty fast because
Yeah.
Sirius Black has been captured, sentenced, and is due to be executed in like 2 hours.
Mhm. And it's like Ron's leg is all casted up, so he's kind of stuck in the spot. And Harry and Hermione are there, and Dumbledore comes in.
Yeah. And real quickly, what do you think about Michael Gambon's Dumbledore as he replaced Richard
Harris.
I
was a big Richard Harris fan, and Michael Gambon really has some ups and downs for me. I really like Richard Harris, but I don't know if he could have done the stuff later on in the franchise, though I would have liked to have seen it. I think it would have been a really solid evolution of the character, going from like this sweet man to this all-powerful wizard. But Michael Gambon in the third movie, people forget that Prisoner of Azkaban is his first movie and not Goblet of Fire, I think. And here he's very, I think he's okay here. He's very philosophical in this movie, and
he just has that one moment of playfulness / cartoonishness with Ron's leg.
Right. There's a little silliness here and there. And then, kind of the wink at here in just a minute after he gives over the time turner.
Yeah, whenever he basically tells them exactly what to do without telling them what to do.
Yeah. And then Goblet of Fire, he's horrible. He's the worst possible Dumbledore in Goblet of Fire.
He said quietly.
Yeah, he said quiet. I think by the time you get to Half-Blood Prince, he is damn near perfect. And the scene in Harry's head, like in the last movie, in the all-white train station, King's Crossing, he does very, very well in that moment as well. I think he really got Dumbledore down by the end. But before that, he was just like, I had some issues with him and his performance.
Yeah. And then, this wraps up with Hermione putting the chain over Harry's head.
Mm-hmm.
And I do love this one last little moment of Harry starts to put his hand up to touch the time turner, and Hermione slaps it away.
Yeah.
And it's like, in my mind, Hermione is thinking to herself, this is a serious wizard artifact.
Yeah.
Some third-year wizard should not be touching that unless their name is Hermione Granger.
For real, that's funny.
But yeah, and then that ends this loop. Is there anything else that you wanted to say?
I don't think so. I think I got my say out, and I think I've rambled long enough. We're almost out of time again.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining me. And why don't you go take a quick moment to let everybody know where they can find you online?
You can find me in my podcasts, including Infoblast and the occasional Navigating the Multiverse, even though that's kind of on hiatus, among other shows at Rabbit Hole Podcast, which can be found at rabbitholepodcast.com.
And I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightsnightsandmovienights.com. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. And we also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that and discuss the episodes as they come out, as well as get information about future seasons, what we'll be covering, which the next season coming up in after the next hiatus episode will be Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. That will be starting on Halloween, and episodes will be coming out every Monday and Thursday. So until next time.
I'm literally looking at myself on my...
Time is unfaithful for those
Teacher,
who
I'm
abuse
literally looking at myself on my...
Time is unfaithful for
Teacher,
those who
I'm
abuse it.
literally looking at myself on my...
The lotto is not gambling. The lotto is a tradition. It's an Italian tradition.
Teacher,